Buenas and Hafa Day. The Committee on Health, Land, Justice, and Culture is now called to order. Today's Friday, July 26, 2024. The time is about 9:08 a.m. In compliance with the Open Government Law, notice for this public hearing was published in the Guam Daily Post and on the Government of Guam Public Notice Portal on Thursday, July 18 and Wednesday, July 24, 2024. Notice was also sent by email to all senators and all main media broadcasting outlets. And this hearing is being live streamed on the Guam Legislature's YouTube channel. The only rule I really want to enforce here is that when you're going to testify, please state your name. We're going to transcribe all of these proceedings, so we just want to be able to identify who's speaking. Thank you. And our one agenda item for this morning at 9 a.m. is Bill number 327-37. This is a bill sponsored by myself. It's an act to authorize the extension of the term of the lease between the Guam Ancestral Lands Commission and AT&T Corporation. I'd like to acknowledge that Senator Terlaje is also here with me, Situsmasi Senator. As the primary sponsor of the bill, I'm going to introduce it. This bill was introduced at the request of the Guam Ancestral Lands Commission. They had submitted resolution number 2024-001, which was unanimously adopted by the Ancestral Lands Commission, approving draft legislation that would authorize the extension of the term of a current lease between Guam Ancestral Lands Corp and AT&T Corp. Guam Ancestral Lands Commission and AT&T Corp. So 5 GCA Section 5127 mandates that any lease exceeding 5 years, including any extensions, options, or renewal, must be authorized by the Guam legislature. So the proposal is to extend the AT&T lease, which has been in place now for 5 years, for 45 more years through this bill and pursuant to the terms of the current lease. In section 3.01B of the lease, it states, quote, in the event that GALC is able to obtain approval for an extended term contract, tenant shall have 9 successive options to extend the term of the lease for 5 years each, commencing from the expiration date of the initial term, provided that the Guam legislature approves an extended term contract as defined by Section 5127, Subtitle C, Article 2, Chapter 5, Title 5, Guam Code, annotated, should such be required. The lease would also have to be approved by the AG as to form and executed by the governor and attested to by the lieutenant governor in accordance with 21 GCA 60114C. But the original lease was already approved by all of those signatories. Additionally, the bill would require that AT&T continue to pay all real property taxes levied and assessed on the property and improvements pursuant to applicable law. So the current lease, I just want to put the expiration date up. The current lease is set to expire September 30, 2024, right? And so without this bill, the options to continue that lease for 5-year periods would expire as well. So this bill would be to continue the lease pursuant to its terms for 5-year increments. All right, we're going to put up a couple maps. I just want everyone to know which property we're talking about. If we could. Thank you. So this is Tangisan area. There's a circle there. We could zoom in a little bit to that circle. This is on the bottom of the circle, left shoreline is the Tangisan old power plant. And you can see on the top of the circle, AT&T cable station. So there's actually a building there, and the cable comes through that building. So the lease brings this cable onshore, or it covers the land that covers the onshore up to the building. Is that correct? All right, thank you. Next slide. So these slides are all from the attachments to the lease. Next slide, please. Yeah. Thank you. This is another view of it with the cliff line showing up above. Yeah. Next slide, please. And it also shows the part on the left where the cable's coming in through the water onto land. Sorry, these are not legible, but I'm going to read from the legible one. So this says approximately 2,000-foot radius. On the far left, again, of that circle bottom, that's the Tangisan power plant where that arrow's pointing near the shore. It's right below Two Lovers Point. That's another marked area here. Well, it's right above Two Lovers Point on this map. So it would be from going from the bottom, Two Lovers Point, and Tangisan power plant, and then the AT&T submerged cable landing, and then the AT&T, the arrow goes towards the, there's an, the AT&T Tangisan cable station, right in there where that curvy line is. And that red mark is an old subsurface communication cable that has to be cleaned up. And on the top, on the far right, kind of bottom section, that's just pointing to the sewage treatment plant. I believe those are up on the cliff. Yeah. All right, next slide. So the bottom picture, we could zoom in. That's maybe something that looks familiar to everyone. If you're looking up from Tangisan, this is the AT&T station that you can see. All right, next slide. If you could zoom in, yeah. So these show the cables coming from the water onto the shore. Some of them are exposed, and one of the side says AT&T cable easement at the tidal zone near Tangisan Beach Park. View is towards the reef line and Philippine Sea to the northwest. 5 of the cables are visible and have been exposed by wave action. You see the pipes? All right, next slide. You can zoom in on that bottom one. Okay, that's all right. Yeah, next slide. This is showing AT&T cable easement marker signs along the dirt access road from Tangisan Beach area. And the bottom one is AT&T cable station parking and 2 of the UST access pipes and vent lines in front of the warehouse roll-up door at right. An observation well cover is located foreground bottom center in the photo. All right, thank you. Yeah, that's all the slides I'm going to show for today. There's other slides attached to the lease, which are some more detailed maps and other things. But I think that was just to give everyone an idea of where this property is located that we're talking about today. So the lease was first executed between AT&T and the U.S. government in 1962 for an initial term that ended 1967. The term included options of 9 additional periods of 5 years each and ended on October 2012. Throughout those years, there were 6 amendments made to that lease that included an increase in the footprint under the lease to allow for the installation, operation, and maintenance of an underground communication coaxial tie cable between its facility and the Harmon Telephone Exchange facility. The other amendment was an increase in the property by an additional 1.16 acres of submerged land described at AT&T Guam shore ends. This is another exhibit in the lease. I was unable to determine when this amendment was made. They escalated the rent from $86.80 per year to $25,004 per year over the term of the lease. There was an environmental baseline survey required, documenting the known history of the property with regard to the storage, release, or disposal of the hazardous substances thereon. Subsequently, a certification of no contamination was attached to the lease. Upon cancellation or relinquishment of the lease, another environmental baseline survey is required to be prepared to document the environmental condition of the property at the time. Additionally, in 2003, the assigner transferred all of its rights, title, and interest in the lease to the assignee for the rest of the term of the lease and extensions thereof, subject to all terms, covenants, and provisions contained in the lease. According to the Guam Ancestral Lands Commission staff reports, Lot AKJD was returned back to the government of Guam in July 2002. The property was transferred from the United States government or General Services Agency to the government of Guam via a quitclaim deed pursuant to the Guam Excess Lands Act. That's in 2002. In February 2013, notice was given that the U.S. government acknowledged termination of the lease and that AT&T's continued use of the property should be addressed with the government of Guam as the current owner of the property. An appraisal was furnished, but I have not been able to locate that appraisal. In 2018, the Department of Land Management created a survey map of the entire leased area since none previously existed and designated the AT&T parcel as Lot 10192, Municipality of Dedido, containing 12,579 square meters. In October 2019, a settlement was executed in regards to back rent from AT&T for the rental period from January 2007 to September 2019. And that amount was $4,896,725. That's a settlement amount for back rent. And then a new lease with the government of Guam was executed in October 2019 as well. And that lease would go, for the initial term was October 2019 to September 2024, and that's where we are today. The rent is $275,273 payable. This is an annual rent payable monthly installments. So $275,273 a month, a year. So if extended, it should escalate. The rent should escalate every 5th year by 10%. And every 20 years, rent shall be adjusted to the fair market value using the 10% capitalization rate. So we'll get back to the rent later, and maybe with Gita up here as well. So the fair market value, every 20 years, rent shall be adjusted to the fair market value using the 10% capitalization rate. The original fair market value was to be determined by appraisal selected by the landlord and tenant, who will split the costs evenly. And the options to extend for 5 years each was provided in that lease. So the lease had said that GIDA would use its best efforts to pursue a Section 5127 extended term contract. And so we'll talk about that. 5127 has its own requirements of notice to the public that they are going to go for a longer than 5-year lease, and solicit input. But it looks like this bill, if it is passed, will forego that Section 5127 process and pretty much do a legislative approval of these extensions. All right. I'd like to thank those who are present here today. Oh, and I also want to recognize my colleague and the vice chair of my committee, Senator Joanne Brown. And I know we have representatives from the Guam Ancestral Lands Commission, the commissioners themselves. I see them here, as well as the chair. And we have some of the management team here. So I'd like to welcome Guam Ancestral Lands to this table if they are willing to testify. And I know we also have GIDA with us, and GIDA has been serving as the consultant for Guam Ancestral Lands on this matter. So you're also welcome to come to the table. And we also have other people who signed up to testify. We'll start with these two. So again, this bill was introduced at the request of the Guam Ancestral Lands Commission. So what I'd like to do today is, that was a very bare bones approach to the matter, what I just stated, and maybe you could more enlighten us. What is the need for this? Why does it have to be for an extended period? What is the benefit to the people of Guam for it to be at this extended period? Is this the best value we're going to get for Guam Ancestral Lands Commission at this doing this process? All right, so we'll begin with the chairperson of the Guam Ancestral Lands, Mr. Eclavea.
Buenas, Speaker and senators. I am the chairman of the Ancestral Lands Commission. My name is Ron Eclavea, and we approve. We're asking the legislature to approve the bill that extends the lease. We feel it's very beneficial to the beneficiaries of the Ancestral Lands Commission. And we did have our land agents, our land managers for GIDA, that are property managers that have been very diligent in working out the stipulations in the bill. And we're basically very happy with the lease, and we would like the legislature to approve the bill as submitted, and we're open for any questions that you may have.
Mr. Chair. Mr. Laguana, did you want to testify as a commissioner?
Yeah, one is enough today. But I was in the Tacosi Brown or Laguana too. Guau is segundo gehulu. Who support their low Zangingua or Trune, Angingua, Moss, Gaini Nasinia. Para utulisti na tano para menaulik jam mas meges lapi itu lo it's kita atan no highest and best use zangen gua ha gena hujung malago man propone pocinili isti it's tahungu gininsia lo mentrest tataza eningokuno ta support yasti it's right sejus masi
Mr. Nyot Laguana. Ms. Blas.
Good morning. My name is Catherine Blas. I am the Acting Executive Director of the Guam Ancestral Lands Commission. I'd like to read our testimony. As mentioned previously, the Board of Commissioners of the Guam Ancestral Lands Commission met at its regular board meeting on January 17, 2024, and approved resolution number GALC 2024-001, extension of the term of the lease between Guam Ancestral Lands Commission and AT&T Corp. With that said, the Guam Ancestral Lands Commission is in full support of Bill 327-37 COR. I went on ahead and I attached our resolution to the testimony for your immediate reference. Dunklin Sizus Masi.
Sizus Masi, Ms. Blas, Acting Director. All right, now I guess we'll hear from Gita, the Deputy Director.
Good morning, Carlos Berdalio, the Deputy Administrator for GITA, and we're here to support the bill.
Off Day Senator, my name is Diego Mendiola. I work for GITA in the Real Property Division. As our deputy said, GITA supports the passage of the bill, and we are here to assist in answering whatever questions you may have to the best of our ability.
Sizus Masi.
My name is Mike Cruz, also with GITA, and I agree with what both the director and the real property administrator indicated.
All right, thank you. Well, let's start with the terms of the lease say that GITA, I think, will pursue the Section 5127. Was that done?
Was with the guidance of the AG's office at the time when we were executing this, Assistant Attorney Nicholas Toft, guided us through the process and had advised that if we take this lease and request the legislature to approve, that would be sufficient as far as what we needed to do in order to follow the process of, getting a long-term lease approved and executed.
All right. So the 5127 was a process that mandates for any GovGuam lease that extends over 5 years, they have to state the need, they have to solicit, publish, and use a sealed bid process. And let's give notice that they intend to lease this property for longer than 5 years and then use a sealed bid process to bring in competition for that longer term lease. All right, so that was not done. Okay, so there's some other questions I have too. Do you understand, according to the term, oh, I'm sorry, could my staff make sure that the senators have a copy of the lease, or is that on the drive? Oh, okay, it's on the drive. If they could get copies of the lease for the senators. All right, so could you describe the submerged land that's part of this lease?
This is Mike Cruz, Madam Speaker. The submerged lands has not been transferred to the government of Guam. It is still owned by the federal government. The governor has requested that that property be returned, but it has not, at least to our knowledge.
All right, so what is this part where they talk about submerged lands on Exhibit C?
Well, in my reading of the lease, Senator, the exhibit shows that that this is where the cable is coming in from the ocean to the terrestrial part of the property.
So you think Exhibit C is only for land, not submerged land?
Sorry, Madam Speaker, I didn't print the entire, all of the exhibits. That would be a couple hundred pages, but the exhibits describe, I guess, to the latitude, longitude of every point from the sea into the land, and it lets both sides know that the terrestrial part of where these cables come in is defined by the latitude and longitudes of every point all the way from the land into the sea or vice versa.
Okay, because my reading of this is that it does contain some of the submerged lands, because the leased premises is described in the lease under section 2.01C. It says that certain real property known as the ocean ground bed, consisting of a 20-foot wide easement containing approximately 8,000 square feet, as indicated on Exhibit C. And then subsection D says that certain real property known as the west cable entrance to shore edge, consisting of a 20-foot wide underground easement containing approximately 25,000 square feet, as indicated on Exhibit C. So that's the shore, but the other part sounds like the ocean ground bed.
Yes, ma'am. It shows where from the shore out into the ocean where the cable would be, or the cables would be.
All right, the reason I'm asking is because we passed other legislation regarding submerged cables and how we are going to charge for those. And I want to be consistent if we're going to be doing submerged cable leases. So can you just tell me again your conclusion? You're telling us that there is no submerged ground involved in this lease?
Not that Ancestral has leased to AT&T. I believe the attachments that you're referring to refer to easements that AT&T had earlier received. And they wanted to ensure that those easements remain intact.
Okay. So these are all non-GALC properties. Okay. All right. Do you know, since you're Gita, do you know the status of those returned lands? Was that listed in the request by the governor for which property should be returned?
Yes, ma'am.
All right. And was there a response from the Secretary of the Navy as to those?
I believe that they're considering the return of the submerged, but as far as we know, it has not been approved for return yet.
All right. So normally they reply with an exhibit, a list of the same properties that were requested, and they put a very specific response like, we will work on this pending, or we will not do this one.
Yes, ma'am.
Do you know what they said on that? They said yes?
The letter from the Navy in the attachment, as you're referring to, indicates that they would transfer it.
Okay.
But then they subsequently said, all of the transfers are on hold because of missile defense and other things that the military was considering. So since 2020, when the governor requested the property, we haven't heard anything about the military transferring.
Okay. When they said all transfers on hold, is that in a document that you could send to me?
Sure.
Thank you. All right, thanks. All right, so there's a couple more questions. So let's talk about what the rental amounts will be if this lease is continued under its current terms. Are you able to project those for us?
Yes, ma'am, at least for the first three 5-year options. The current rental rate is $275,000 per year. According to the lease, this will escalate every 5 years at 10% increase. So it'll be 275 plus 27, and then on the 20th year, it goes. Yeah. All right. But at any rate, the lease rate is going to be determined by fair market appraisal after the first 20 years.
And when do you expect that then? Which extension?
It's the fair market value appraisal is every 20 years, so it'll be on the fourth 5-year.
So are you counting the beginning of the lease?
Yes, ma'am.
For 5 years ago?
Yes.
As 20 years from then?
Yes.
Okay, what year is that?
That's 2019.
Okay, so 20, oh no, I mean, so when would the 20 years be? It would be 20, which one of these? One, two, three, four.
No. I'm sorry, Madam Speaker, I have a correction. In the lease, the first fair market value evaluation will be this year if this lease is approved.
Okay,
Yeah,
that's what I want to know.
Yeah, so it's going to start, beginning on the first day after the expiration of the initial term, which started in 2019, the rent shall be at fair market value. And then every 5th year subsequently, it goes 10%.
Okay, so we
And then-
would assume that it would be higher than the current 275, the fair market value?
Yes, ma'am, we believe it would be, but, we would, in partnership with the tenant and the commission, we would get a appraiser qualified to determine the value and go from there.
All right, and if the fair market value was the same, let's say as it is today, or whatever you used to calculate the current rent, the 5% increases every 5 years would really just go from 275,000 to 302,000 per year.
10%, ma'am.
Or 10%?
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah, so about that. And then what happens in 2035? Is that the 20 years?
Yes, that'll be the 20-year anniversary.
2035, what do you expect to happen?
Another appraisal to determine the value at that point.
And then what?
And then the rent gets adjusted to 10% capitalization rate of that.
What does that mean?
That means, for example, if the appraisal says the property is worth $1 million, then 10% of the million would be 100,000, and that will be the annual rent for that period. Okay.
And what about the fair market value that they're going to determine now? Is it going to be 10% of an appraisal again?
It would be 10% of the fair market value that is appraised, yes, ma'am.
Okay. Is that how the 275 was determined? 275,000?
The 275 initial was determined by, how would I say, negotiation with Ancestral, GITA, and AT&T. GITA had, looked at, different appraisals and different leases, comparables like the Australian cable that, with the federal government. And so we went into negotiations with AT&T to try and determine what a fair market price, rental price, lease rate would be. And so AT&T came in, with an offer of 120,000. And Ancestral, with GITA's assistance, we were shooting for somewhere close to at least 300. And so through negotiations, all parties settled on 275.
GITA was using the same methodology for its estimate, that it did back then, what do you think it might be, fair market value?
We believe it's closer to the, 300 approximate, or maybe 350.
Even now?
Well, we haven't looked at it since then, but we believe that it would be higher now than it was before.
All right. These are for land access, right? And so I looked at other leases, like in California, Garden Grove, where they are leasing out their easements for these cable companies to come in and lay them down. And if I remember correctly, those were like $100,000 per cable line. Is that right? I don't know. I'm going to look at that more closely now that I know how you calculated these rental amounts. And I guess what happened was, just for like the submerged land as well, the regular process of appraisal was just not sufficient for those things. All right. Why did the back rent start at 2007?
Well, there was, from what we understand, reading from the history and the letters back and forth with AT&T, the federal government, and the government of Guam, there was confusion between AT&T itself and the federal government as to when their lease with them was going to expire. So there was confusion if it was 2012, and then subsequent amendments, said that the lease ends in 2006, going backwards. And so, there was a period of time in question between 2006 and 2018, and through negotiations and to our reading, of all the documents, GITA and Ancestral communicated with AT&T that we believe that the lease ends in 2006. So starting from 2006, our goal was to, try and recover as much revenue that would have been paid to the commission. And so, that was our goal. And so we pegged it close to 5.2 approximately. AT&T pegged it closer to 1.6. And so through negotiation, we settled on 4.8 and change.
Okay, so I'm calculating that 4.8 million, and that's good that GITA was able to go back even longer to 2006, because the land wasn't transferred until 2013, right? Or something like that, 20, or even later, 20?
Well, it was up until 2002, but even with the transfer, the document said that it still had to take into consider any existing leases. So, even if the property transferred, the lease with between AT&T and the federal government was still in effect.
Oh, so the property was transferred at 2002 to
Yes,
Guam?
ma'am. Yes, ma'am.
Oh,
It was approved for transfer in 2002.
okay. So for the 12 years between 2007 and 2019, they settled for 4.8 million kind of back rent, and that's about like $4,081 a year at that point, right? Am I calculating that right?
It doesn't sound.
So the 4 million divided by 12 years?
Yeah.
4.8 million? What do you guys got? $408,000. Okay, so $408,000 a year. That's good. So how come, this now we're so much lower than that going forward?
Well, in order for, in negotiations, the Ancestral was looking to, recover as much past revenue as possible. At the same time, AT&T was looking for a long-term lease. So it was was kind of like a give and take. If AT&T would be willing to, agree to a higher back rent, then then Ancestral would be willing to, to agree to a long-term lease. And so the trade-off with the back rent and the initial rent is higher back rent and slightly lower initial rent for the initial term, but with the understanding that any years beyond would require the approval of the legislature, as well as fair market value to bring it up to current.
Okay. Tell me again, when you made that settlement, you said you had come up with a number, AT&T had come up with a number. How did you come up with your number?
Well, we came up with our number, going back to, 2006, when we believed that the lease with the federal government ended, and we used numbers from comparables with still the existing Australian cable station at the time, comparables, within the area, and so we were pegging it closer to, as whatever the range we were looking, towards the much higher range. And, understandably, AT&T was also looking at the much lower range, so that's where we believe that the difference was. And so, with the back rent, their starting position at 1.6, and, our starting position at 5.1, we believe that Ancestral, benefited tremendously from the settlement in 4.8.
Sure, to get that money right then. So we just want to make sure they're going to benefit going forward. When you did that and you came up with your amount, I'm glad you looked at Australian cable, other things, but was that a traditional fair market value evaluation like is being proposed to be used going forward, or would you be able to use a similar type of valuation?
Well, we believe that, in the lease, provides and requires for an appraisal.
Yes.
And so, every appraisal has to be done by a licensed appraiser, licensed on Guam. And so, we would work with the appraiser also, but, at least that would give us a real qualified individual or firm, to look at, the true value of this specific piece of property. And, since both sides agreed to it, AT&T also agreed that, to the fair market, then we believe that the Ancestral would be getting a fair contract from the tenant.
But back then you didn't use that traditional appraisal, right?
No, we use existing leases, or the existing lease, and appraisals on nearby properties.
Yeah, and because I'm afraid that the traditional appraisals will be too low. That's what we saw with the other cables, right? $10,000 was what they were paying based on some fair market value appraisal versus $100,000 per cable, up to 6 cables, $600,000. Very different. That's what I'm afraid here, why these terms, if we're bound to an appraisal, right? Or I agree with your methodology a little bit better that these are different types of leases, right? And maybe they should be evaluated differently. That's what I thought. So I don't know. I'd like to hear your proposal on that and see if we maybe could get your best recommendation. So according to the photos that we put up earlier, there were 5 cables visible exposed on this shoreline. How many actually are there going in and out? 5? 5?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
5.
Just wanted to know. All right, and then ask a few more questions. Okay. Do you expect an environmental survey to be done again, according to the terms of this lease, in any part of the upcoming periods?
Not.
Or only at the end?
Only at the end.
The very end?
Yes, but
So 50 years later, we'll get an environmental assessment?
Well, as long as to the very end of when the tenant is on the property.
And if they, now there were a bunch of photos attached to the lease that talked about, you know, there's PCB that needs to be cleaned up and other things. Is that something that we are handling or managing or ensuring that is being done? Is that part of, or how is that being done?
The standard, from what I've learned, the standard process of the transfer of land from the military to the government of Guam is you know, the federal government has certain requirements, and for depending on the use, you know, the environmental conditions are you know, cleaned up to a certain point. For example, if the use is for industrial, then it's cleaned up to a certain point, just like with Tizen, when that property was transferred. If it's for residential, then it's cleaned up even further for that specific purpose. So the federal government has its own, I guess, levels of standard and cleanup, depending on purpose, you know, subsequent purpose that the property will be used. So it is, you know, since the transfer was, you know, was done, then I believe that it would have had to have been, based on their own federal requirements, cleaned up to a certain point.
All right. Is anyone aware whether it's been cleaned up or not?
No, this would have been long before our, you know,
All right.
before our time.
And can you just describe one more time to make sure I'm correct, that the lease, as I described, it goes from the shoreline near the Tangisan Power Station to up to the AT&T building that we can see from the shoreline. You look up, that yellow building. And then does it go anywhere else? Or
No, ma'am, it's just just to the facility.
That's it. That's
ma'am.
the part that Guam Ancestral Lands Commission is receiving revenue for.
Yes, ma'am.
All right, thank you. I'd like to also recognize my colleague, Senator Roy Kanata. Thank you, Senator, for being here. All right, so this is Guam Ancestral Lands and Gita. Are there any questions for them before we hear the rest of the testimony, or should we hear the rest? Let's hear the rest of the testimony. Can you guys wait a while? And we're going to hear the rest of the testimony on this lease, and then I'm sure my colleagues have questions for you. Okay? I know. All right, so if we could, I know we just have a couple more people here to testify. Let's hear, so if you don't mind, can I, give them your seats. There's a lot of people signed up, but only a couple to actually give testimony. So I think left we have John, is it Dave? Dave, PDS. Please, you're welcome. And anyone else on this lease? Okay, if not, then this is it, and then we will go back to questions. Please proceed.
Good morning, Senators, and thank you for the opportunity to come down and testify on this important legislation. My company, Pacific Data Systems, is a user of the facility at Tangisan. This is one of the original cable landing stations on Guam, along with Tumon Bay, which used to be called the Australian Cable Station. I think that was the first cable landing station on Guam. Tangisan was the second. These were the original cable landing stations and controlled all of the communications cables coming into and out of Guam. Our first involvement with Tangisan was in 1995. So we've had we've been longtime users of that facility and are relatively familiar with how it works and the process and procedures. We support this legislation because we believe that this is a critical facility for Guam and plays an important role in the future for landing of additional fiber optic cables on Guam, as well as the existing cables at the facility. That said, however, the legislature has the opportunity to update the relationship or the structure of the use of that facility at this time. The facility originally was conceived and operated under very archaic telecommunications rules and procedures that existed really in the 70s and 80s, when telecom was dominated by a few large telecom companies. There was also limited access to these facilities, It's very expensive to gain access, very difficult to use the facilities. In the case of Tengisin, it really hasn't changed in 50 years. Certainly since we started dealing with the facility in 1995 to now, the process and procedures are basically the same. That's in contrast to the other newer facilities that you see built on and in use on Guam today. The facility at Pidi is one example. Also the facility at what's called Tata, which is in Tenjo, more in southern Guam, and newer facilities being built under construction right now at Alapang by GTA. Those facilities operate under a completely different type of regime. They're much more open. They allow for access to the fiber optic cables coming in, cross connection, transfer of data, and so forth. And that's very critical for the future. The future for us in Guam as a primary telecom crossroads in the Pacific and Asia is to facilitate that type of interconnectivity between these facilities. I know the newer facilities at Tenjo, the Tata facility, and the facility at Pidi today are relatively accessible and are more open in nature, whereas the facility at Tengisin is relatively closed. So it's very difficult to gain access, it's very expensive, it takes a long time to get access into the facility. So though we support this legislation, we believe the legislation presents an opportunity to the legislature to create a standardized model where government land is involved to try and encourage the open access to these facilities and also to facilitate the cross-connection and exchange of information between the number of facilities that are going to be built on Guam. It's anticipated that there will be even more cable landing stations built on Guam in the next 3 to 5 years as the number of fiber optic cables really explodes in the Pacific. And Guam, because of its strategic location, is going to be hosting many of those cables. So it's important that the government establish a standardized and consistent policy in how those cables are landed, how the interconnection process works, and as much as possible for the government to encourage that to be an open process to the benefit of all carriers, not an isolated few. And this is important because in the future, the cables that are planned for Guam are going to be dominated by very large communications companies. I'm talking about companies like Google, Facebook, Microsoft. And these companies have the ability to completely put in the facility themselves. So there's really no need, or they have no motivation to allow other people to come in or interconnect and so forth. And that allows them to dominate or basically create a closed shop where they have the information, but it's difficult to interconnect to share that information. So the government, in my mind, the government has an opportunity here to try and create policies that will allow for that, an open exchange of information, particularly where government facilities are involved, or land, submerged land leases. I agree with the questions that Madam Speaker, that you've asked about the submerged land. It's a critical piece of Guam property that basically allows Guam to participate in these projects. Otherwise, Guam really will not benefit significantly from these facilities because, quite frankly, these facilities do not employ a lot of people. Really, they are remotely operated, remotely controlled. Even the Tengisin facility, I believe the head count there is less than 10 people that are locally employed. So the government of Guam should look to monetize these industries in other ways. And certainly the submerged land lease is one way. In the case where there's terrestrial land involved, that's another way. And it is, in my mind, a different model than a traditional real estate type arrangement. And the industry expects that, quite frankly. They know that that's how it works in other places. And, you know, Guam hasn't really embraced that until just recently with the Alapang facility, where there was more discussion about that, and it was understood that this is what the industry expects to pay. All you have to do is make sure that you enforce that. So those are my comments. I really appreciate the opportunity to come down and kind of shed some light on some of this stuff that appears to be a little bit complicated and unusual. But it is a huge opportunity for Guam because of our strategic location. And what's the first 3 rules about real estate? Location, location, location. And certainly in this case, Guam has the location going for it.
Mr. Dave, very grateful for your testimony. Are there examples of what you described in other governments or states, even where they are controlling access or open access, making it more viable?
Yes, I think if you look at the state of Hawaii and also the state of California, all of them have similar landing facilities, and there are arrangements that are made with those companies that are bringing them ashore. I don't think in a lot of cases the terrestrial piece is that prevalent in other locations. So usually they've gone out and made a commercial, they've purchased property, or they've made a lease arrangement with private landowners. And the government is not necessarily in that part of it, but the government is involved in the submerged land part. So in this case, the government is actually in the submerged land piece as well as the terrestrial land component. And I think on Guam, in the case of the Tata facility, that they own the land where the facility is, so the government's not involved in that. But the government is involved in the submerged land leases that bring those cables ashore. Same thing in PD. PD, the government is involved in the land portion and the submerged portion. Alapang, they made a private arrangement for the property, and then the submerged portion. So it varies in each case, but I think the government of Guam, because in a lot of cases there is a terrestrial piece, that the government has an opportunity to also be involved in that part of it.
All right, thank you. By the way, so I'm also having an oversight on the, or a roundtable on the 2 p.m. on the submerged cable leases, CLTC. All right.
Yes, I'll be here for that one too.
All right. Are you able to wait for questions as well?
Sure.
All right, thank you. So if I could ask Gita again to come back up, and Ancestral Lands, whoever's willing to answer questions, maybe the executive director and Joey. And I'll now open it up for Senator Taitagui.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and good morning to my colleagues, especially good morning to those who are here to testify today. I appreciate you bringing this information to us so that we can understand a little bit better what Ancestral Lands want, what AT&T wants, and what's in the best interest of the people of Guam. And that's my concern. The speaker definitely brought in a lot of questions that I had that were answered, but I'm just wondering why, and I guess this is for Ancestral Lands, if Mr. Eclavea, if you want to come to the table as the, Mr. Eclavea, if you'd like to come to the table too, please. You guys have any questions? Because I know that, I know that you take great pride in Ancestral Lands and doing your homework. So I was just wondering, did Ancestral Lands look at the, it was public law, it was a bill that was passed, the speaker mentioned it earlier today in her speaking. It was here, Public Law 36-46, regarding the submarine cables. Did you happen to see those negotiations and what passed then?
You're talking about the infrastructure with the cables that the.
I'm talking about the law, public law 36-46, which was passed in 2021. It was between the Chamorro Land Trust, and it was between them and GTA. Did you happen to review that before?
I did get just a gist of it, but I'm not really too adept at what. I know that Ancestral Lands took a big interest in that, but right now, as far as those submerged lands, they're still in that. With Ancestral Lands, that might be Crown lands that could possibly come back to us. We're not sure what the status of that is right now. Right now, this lease is just basically for the facility itself.
Right.
Yeah. So Joey could probably give you a clearer answer on that. I'm sorry. I wish I would.
Okay. Well, in this bill that was passed, we based it on a lot of information. We've gotten other jurisdictions, of course. We're working hard toward not getting the bad side of the deal for Chamorro Land Trust, which has been obvious over the years that these fiber optic cable or company that have been, not giving us a true value of these rentals. And, we wanted to make sure that that mistake doesn't happen moving forward. So I had hoped that the Ancestral Lands was able to at least, look at that law and see what we did, and even listen to on the floor, the session floor, how these numbers came about and why we were charging per cable being brought into Guam versus, just the property itself, which makes a big difference because cable companies make their money per cable. It's not charged one-time fee, on all the cables coming in. They charge by handling these cables coming in one at a time. And they what is it? They basically charge, I want to say, or their rentals or their contracts between these companies that use the facilities, not just a one-time deal. So that's why we did per cable and charged per cable. And there are 5 coming in to AT&T. So, I admire Ancestral Lands, Ancestral Lands Trust, because you've always been one to really do your homework on this. But this one, I'm a bit disappointed, especially hearing the fact that AT&T had to go back and back pay. They didn't pay for the longest time. And you're dealing with that same group of individuals when negotiating the future.
Yeah, we were kind of in the dark that the land actually was returned. And
it was kind of in the dark that you
I think AT&T themselves were in the dark too, from what I understand, that the military released the property.
Are you sure?
Did
you find any documentation between the federal government and AT&T, since they're very good stewards on their property, especially when it comes to us?
Yeah, well, I without naming the source, I did get a confirmation that they were taken aback that they released that property. As far as the infrastructure, I'm glad you brought. You're saying that there were some mistakes with the submerged lands.
Oh, they were so undercut. Chamorro Land Trust was like not.
You mean with previous submerged lands or
rentals,
after?
Yeah, agreements that were made with other cable, fiber optic cable companies. They were just undercut so much. They were losing out, and that's something I don't want to see Ancestral Lands do.
Senator, I'm glad you brought that up.
I'm hoping you guys will go back to the drawing board on this and reassess it and review during session when we went over this public law.
So
with
are you saying we
Timor-Leste.
should have based our lease agreement
Per
regarding?
cables.
Per cable?
Yeah, just like we're doing with GTA.
Mm.
You know, we need to have some consistency, you know, and if we're going to be doing these, working with fiber optic cables, we have to be fair.
Mm.
And right now, it doesn't even show fairness because we only allow 25-year lease for GTA, a 25-year lease. Of course, they wanted a longer lease. But we had to put in consideration that, you know, over time, do we really get the true value by reassessing after a lease of 45 years and then coming back 20 years to reassess, or every 5 years, 10%? You saw what happened in the last 2 years, how inflation has skyrocketed and the price of everything has gone up, and even property has gone up, especially for Guam because of the military buildup. So I'm just hoping that ancestral lands, I mean, you know, as quickly as you can, because it's important with AT&T, you know, to have a contract locked in place to reassess this. And the other question I have is, when it came to the $4.8 million and dividing it by 12, it came up to almost $400,000. Now, I do understand that maybe some of that might have been interest because they failed to pay, you know, the Ancestral Lands Trust, and they're, you know, add a little interest in there. But you're looking at something that happened since what, 2000? This all began in 2007. So those numbers are quite substantial. So if you were to do that and backdate it from today's date back to, let's say, 2007, you're obviously going to get a lot more than $4.8 million.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up. We did, during the negotiations, the board itself was not involved in the negotiations. We had our director was involved. They kept us abreast, and so was Gita, and our legal counsel. Both were involved in the negotiation.
You mean the board was not involved in this
Well,
negotiation?
they were keeping us abreast with it, but we were not in the direct meetings.
Oh, you got some great minds on that board.
Yeah,
you know, I know Laguantio over there. He's one of those who counts every dime, every penny.
Well, we
you know,
hired Gita, and we have a lot of you know, good history with Gita. We did have some differences in the past, but we're very happy to have Gita negotiating with us. Yeah, and so our legal counsel, legal counsel advised us that this could drag on. I mean, AT&T is a powerful, you know, they're huge. So we were advised that it could be a beneficial negotiation settlement, and so we relied on our legal counsel and Gita and our director. And the administrator of Gita, and they gave us what we felt was the best
bang for your buck.
Yeah, basically. So we could. They originally wanted 1.5 million, and we ended up getting 4. So
well, I think that was very undercut.
As a great deal.
Yeah, I don't know where that 1.5 million. But then I would have to question Gita's.
I think they would
tactics.
have to start low. No, they would have to start low and see, and then
because that's awfully low. So I just, like I said, I'd like to see consistency, and you know, GTA received 25 years, not 45, and there were a lot of restrictions in there. And we made sure that they got the best money, you know, that they could for their properties, because, you know, where all this money goes to, it goes back to the people of Guam. And so does all the money that's raised through this lease. So my question would be to Gita, since, you know, I mean, the board was abreast but not involved. If you were to renegotiate this agreement to something that dealt with per cable, kind of like what we're doing with GTA and other fiber optic cables, which we're going to, you know, we created that as a guideline so that moving forward, any other company that's coming in here, or if they want to add more cables to their already servers, that there's a guideline. And then now we're moving away from that. And we're showing that there's maybe some favoritism going on here, and that's the last thing I'd like to see do. I want to be fair. So if you were to increase it or charge per cable that's coming into AT&T, exactly what they do when they're charging their fees to the people coming in, it's per cable, would they decide to pack up and leave Guam?
Um, I, I don't know, ma'am. I can't speak for them, but the, you know, if the submerged lands were a part of the, you know, a part of the consideration at the time, then, you know, we would have certainly, you know, taken that into consideration.
Oh, the cable, per cable, you mean?
Well, this lease, the timing of it, Senator, is that, you know, we were negotiating, we executed the lease before that issue came up, and the submerged property was not yet, and is still not yet in the hands of Ancestral. So,
Okay,
yeah.
the bill was passed.
Yes,
The bill was passed in August of 2021.
yes, ma'am.
I heard you guys just started negotiating this in January of this year.
No, ma'am, we did this in 2019.
Okay,
Yeah, so
okay.
yeah, we negotiated and executed the lease in 2019.
Is there anybody here from AT&T? You're here from AT&T. Can you answer the question? If we were to renegotiate this contract to provide that fairness that we've done with other fiber optic cables, would AT&T leave Guam? And please identify yourself, and I appreciate it. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Edwin Eclavea.
Eclafia.
Yes, I work for AT&T. I am not in a position to answer that question. I'd have to bring that to,
I'm sorry, can you speak into the microphone? I'm so sorry.
I'm sorry, I'm not in a position to answer that question.
Okay, but you're here.
Yes.
Okay.
Mr. Cravea, do you mind, Mr. Cravea, can you state your name, and are you here to represent AT&T? Can you state your position?
Yes, my name is Edwin Eclavea. I'm a manager of the cable stations on the island. I'm here to support the bill and just kind of take some notes on what's occurring today and report back to my leadership. We just got the notice about the hearing the other day. So my director and some other representatives from the company weren't able to make it out here in time for the meeting. So they asked that I come down and you know, just listen in and be able to report back.
And you're the manager of the operations here on Guam?
Yeah, that's correct.
Situs Masi. Senator Tait.
Thank you. Thank you so much for letting us know who you are, and at least having somebody, a representative here. I'm sure you're going to take back some of the things that we mentioned, and it's on YouTube, so you'll be able to have them listen in on it, your higher-ups or your bosses.
Yes.
You know, don't get me wrong, I think AT&T is a good company. We encourage all kinds, I mean, we are having Google come here. We've got, you know, Virgin Air, who's now gone into fiber optic cables. And just to let you know, we know how important Guam is to fiber optic cables. We are very strategically located, considered one of the third in Asia when it comes to fiber optic cables. We understand from the US when cables stop in Hawaii and then recharge in Guam, you know, it's all about speed. And these companies compete for speed. And speed happens when the fiber optic cables land on certain areas and then it's pushed out to other countries. So Guam is so strategically located. The other islands, you know, was brought up to our attention too, that the other islands like Palau or Yap or even FSM to put fiber optic cables in, well, they can do that as well. But Guam, we have stability on Guam. We've got more reliability on power grid, and when it comes to natural disasters, we recover a whole lot faster. And we have guidelines and rules and regulations. Democracy here, you know, so there's a safety to having these fiber optic cables land on Guam. So we know our wealth. We definitely know our wealth. And for years, we've been taken advantage of by these fiber optic cables. And I don't think I want to see that happen. We worked very hard in 2021 for that last bill, and I asked that the ancestral lands, please listen to that session. Know your wealth. And don't be abreast, be involved into the negotiations, because we bank on you to protect the people's lands and make sure you get your bang for your buck. So, but most of all the other questions were asked, and it was answered, and I'm a bit disappointed because I don't see the fairness and consistency that we have started a couple years ago when it comes to fiber optic cables. I've been working on this since 2019, created a task force on fiber optic cables in 2019 to know the importance that Guam, holds. So let's not be taken advantage of anymore. And I'm just, that's all I have to say. I've just seen the contract here. I just hope that you can look at this. Yes, go ahead.
Could I say something for the record real quick?
Sure.
Yes, Edwin is in Eclevea. He is my first cousin. But when all these things were taking place with AT&T, he was not. I didn't even know he worked for AT&T. He was working in Hawaii. Mm-hmm. So all of the negotiations and legal, aspect of this was done prior to him being signed to AT&T here. I didn't even know he worked for AT&T.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah, and 2019 is when we signed this this agreement. And I believe Joey, our land agent, wants to say something real quick.
Okay, and thank you for always being transparent, Mr. Eclevea. I know that you would recuse yourself if there was any kind of conflict, so I appreciate that, and thank you for clarifying that. Hi, Joey. It's good to see you. I mean, this is the brain behind all the land on Guam, so you definitely have the floor, please.
Thank you. Good morning, Senators. So I just wanted to clarify, because I think there's some confusion here. Okay. What we're dealing with AT&T is just the building. So for instance, just like the legislature, right, we're only leasing the building itself. Anything beyond its boundary of the building, mm-hmm, we don't control. And so that's in the lease that says that we are only, so with AT&T, just the structure and within the fence line, mm-hmm, everything outwards going to the submerged cables, that is not part of the lease, that is not part of the negotiations. Mm-hmm. So I hear what you're saying, that we that's something to look into, but that we don't own that property. We only own the building and the land that it sits on top of, and then the fenced-in area. Okay, well, thank you so much for that. And I've been a businesswoman for several years, and many years actually, and do realize that sometimes when you have lease agreements, it's a set amount plus a percentage of whatever is brought into that business. So we can look at it as every cable brings in a certain percentage of revenue for AT&T. Yeah, so you can take a rental part and then incorporate that. So no, I do understand the situation, and the submerged lands, I'm looking forward to Chamorro Land Trust, jumping on this and getting their bang for their buck, because these cables are coming in through submerged
to add to that, when the incident came up with COTC and the fiber optics, it did catch our attention, mm-hmm, because we were hopefully anticipating that maybe some of those submerged lands will come to us, mm-hmm, but and so I'm sure that once we know that these lands were coming back, the board would spend a big part of its attention towards what happened with COTC. So I'm just kind of curious as to how the information came about, that how you got the information that they were being, shortchanged. I wonder how that information came about. So I'm interested in that. Maybe later.
Of course, definitely.
Yeah, I have no idea how they were shortchanged.
Well, if you watch the public hearing or the session that we had, there was a lot of explanation as to why they were shortchanged, because they were not charged in an amount that it's really worth. Yeah. And these companies are making hundreds of millions of dollars. Hundreds of millions of dollars. And here we were charging, what, $28,000 a year? Hmm. From companies that generate that much revenue? $28,000 a year? You undercut ourselves, and we have to stop doing that. Fiber optic cables have become a great big business for a lot of people to make a lot of money in the hundreds of millions. So Guam is strategically located in a prime spot where we don't need to be taken advantage of anymore. We need to charge what's fair, and we need to be consistent with even our other regulatory agencies like Chamorro Land Trust. And Ancestral Land Trust should be together in this and, help each other out. So other than that, I greatly appreciate everybody's testimony. And I just want to advocate for the people of Guam and not get shortchanged. So I appreciate your testimonies. And I have another meeting I have to attend and excuse myself, but thank you. Agamas. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Masi, Senator Taitagui. Senator Brown.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker, and welcome to all of you that are here today with regards to testimony on this bill. And I understand it's been clarified that this is for the land side of the lease agreement that's being looked at. But I also agree with the comments of my colleague here that we need to look at consistency, be it Ancestral Lands or Chamorro Land Trust, in terms of the timelines for this lease agreement. What if we don't approve this lease agreement? What's the consequence to the Ancestral Lands Commission?
In terms of revenue, it would be about 275,000, correct? At least 275,000. So if it is renewed, then there would be a fair market value appraisal, and then an adjustment to the lease. But at the very least, there will be a 10% escalation. Yes.
And what if we don't approve it to a period of 50 years? I'm a little always reserved. I understand companies, understandably, when they're making an investment, want to know that they have the time to reap not only what they've invested, but of course, their profit margins with regards to that. What if we don't agree to 50 years? What if we decide it's 30 years, 25 years, 40 years?
I believe that's under your purview to control that. That's the law states you can.
No, I understand we can do it. my response is, what is that consequence to you? I'm always leery. I'm just relaying it because I'm always leery of super long.
How does that affect our lease agreement signed? Our lease agreement.
This current lease will expire, and we would have to restart the process over again. Whether or not AT&T would stay, that's up to AT&T. But we would have to this lease would end, and we'd have to go back to the drawing board again.
Well, and I'm relaying that just in case, because I mean, you have decided in this, or the proposal is that it's up for a 50-year agreement. And I just have reservations with regards to long-term agreements in terms of how many years we're talking about, because certainly it's beyond the lifetime, probably most of us in this room, if we're looking at 50 years, probably except for maybe Senator Kanata, who has, our junior senator, will probably still be here in 50 years. But I also agree with, even though we understand there's the Ancestral Lands Commission, Chamorro Land Trust, but we do need to look at some consistency and some fairness. And I know that issue, I mean, this is a very competitive industry, and I don't want, we're just taking care of one and we're disadvantaging other companies out there. I think we need to have a standard playing field so everybody that comes to the table knows, we're going to give a standard amount of lease for this company, and, be it Ancestral Land or Chamorro Land Trust, that we kind of standardize that so that we're not selecting one over the other, favoring, because so-and-so's my carrier, I'm going to give them, as extra, and I'm not going to give the other company because I don't like the other company. I think we need to kind of look at, as Senator Taitagui had talked about, we standardize what the amount of the cable lines are, even though you mentioned, you currently do not have jurisdiction over that, but if you were in the future, we'd like to see consistency in that amount as well, so that you're getting the revenue base. And then, like I said, any other company coming to the table has an idea of what to expect. So we're not biasing one or favoring one over the other, that there's consistency to that. I mean, off the top of my head, for me, I would have reservations about 50 years. I'd probably want to bring that down a bit so that the opportunity is there down the road to reevaluate. It might be in favor of ancestral lands, it may not be. But then it allows the players at the table at that time to come back and reevaluate that agreement. Because, we can say, oh, it's a plus, we're going to get X amount for 50 years, that's a good deal, plus we're going to get an escalation amount that's going to be calculated percentage, and this looks good, but who knows? It could be better, it could be worse, but I think at some point, it's always good to come back to the table and redetermine if that's the best place to be at that moment in time. if it's better, then by all means, you have an opportunity to even increase what your revenue stream is. So that's the point I do want to relay. With regards to the submerged lands that are attached, should I understand, is this still federal property? It's still in the federal property inventory, the submerged lands leading up to this?
Yes, ma'am.
And if it were to be turned over, who would it go to? Do you know, would it go to ancestral lands, or would this fall under Chamorro Land Trust?
GITA's understanding is that any federal properties returned to the government of Guam, it's either public use or goes to ancestral.
Okay.
Federal properties, that's what we understand for their enabling legislation.
And that would be automatically would go to ancestral? I mean, ancestral would be determined as to whether or not there are any, and then again, do previous owners of these lands prior to the military taking over, what authority do they have over submerged lands?
Yeah, that's.
I'm not aware at land management, if I've got beachfront property in Pago Bay, I own the submerged land in front of it at the beach. I'm not aware of that. Historically, I'm not aware of that. I mean, normally, the beach strand and everything beyond that within our economic zone is owned by the government of Guam. And I guess we would determine, I'm not aware there's private ownership of submerged lands. Are you have information otherwise?
No, ma'am, I do
so
not
then
have.
I think we probably need to verify whether or not would that submerged land go to ancestral land. If it's not part of that history, then I don't see why it would go to you. And I guess we'd have to look at the law of Chamorro Land Trust. Would it automatically go to Chamorro Land Trust? Or is only those lands that were reserved at the time that the legislation was put in place go to land trusts? Well, that's probably something we just need to get more information. But at least if that were to be the opportunity, if the land were to go to you.
Senator?
Yes.
Our land agent could comment on that.
Okay. Sure.
Yes, so the land would go to us, but not automatically. It would have to be deeded from the governor to us. But by law, it says that it's supposed to go to Ancestral Lands Commission. But with that 3646, the submerged land law, any revenues would go to Chamorro Land Trust. So we did submit testimony to that, notifying the legislature that, we didn't agree with that. We felt that if any future submerged lands transferred, any revenues should go to ancestral lands, but unfortunately, the land will go to us, but the revenues will go to Chamorro Land Trust.
Well, we'd have to look at it because I'm curious why it would go to you if
That's
you
the
don't.
law, 2545.
I understand. Laws can be changed. I understand what you're telling me, but the logic as to why it would go to ancestral lands. When, like I said, I'm not aware that these properties were privately owned. These submerged lands were privately owned prior to the federal government taking these lands.
Yeah, so if there's no ownership, then part of our law says that we would call them crown lands. And those crown lands we would use to generate income to compensate landowners who didn't get their land back. So that's why it's going to go to us. So that's, if it has private landowners, then our job is to find that landowner. If there's no private landowner, then we use that to generate income through the land bank trust. And so that's why the legislature, I guess, wrote the law that way. Any future excess lands after 1999 go to ancestral lands. So we're the agency that handles excess federal lands. We can also receive GovGuam excess lands, but that has to be up to the legislature. So that's the process, the way it is right now. Any excess future federal excess lands will go to us, and if there's private landowners, we return it back to the original landowners. If not, then we consider it non-ancestral lands or crown lands, and we use that to fund the land bank trust to compensate landowners who didn't get their lands back.
But was there do you have any knowledge of prior again to the land takings that these submerged lands were ever privately owned?
Yes, so on the land takings, if a landowner wanted to claim submerged lands, they would have had to have done that, I believe, before 1940. I think there was an opportunity where a landowner could claim submerged lands or beyond the high water mark. So I believe, like Senator Juan Pat, I think they own the island down in Agate. So that's one example. But other than that, everything else is government land. So there was the opportunity to, if a landowner wanted to file a claim, then there was that opportunity. But when the during the land condemnations, on our research, we don't see any compensation or any,
You're not aware of the history of that?
no, we don't see anybody being compensated for the submerged lands.
Well, it's an interesting discussion. It's just something perhaps to be looked at some point, because again, for me, if it was not part of the original inventory that would fall under ancestral lands, I understand what you're saying about any additional properties coming back, but I think it's just a question is, you know, should that be the case, or do we look at another use for that? Because now there's, you know, there's a monetary, you know, there's money involved. And who should it go to? Should it go to ancestral lands, or are there other public needs that it should go to if it's property to be turned over with regards to submerged lands? So anyway, I just want to relay that concern. I don't know if I would support a 50-year lease agreement. I'd like to look at what the other companies have been given in terms of their time with regards to government property. I know in some cases, some of these telecommunications companies have agreements with private property owners. If they don't own the land outright, maybe they have separate agreements with private property owners. But I certainly appreciate the information you've provided and your efforts in moving this forward. Thank you. Thank you very much, Madam Speaker.
Vice Chair, Senator Brown. Senator Canetta. All right, I had a couple more questions. So for Gita, the easements, according to the lease, as you pointed out earlier, those are all owned by somebody else. And the lease is very clear that Ancestral Lands is swearing that they are not going to impede use of those other properties, the easements going to this building, but that they do not know who the owners are. But who are the owners?
We don't know who the owners are either. Joey, would you know?
So if we're going to base ourselves on the property maps, then the owner would be a private landowner, either Estate 103 or Estate 104. But depending on the way the land transfer is read, ownership of the lands versus pre-existing easements, AT&T may still have the authority to continue to use those easements. So with our lease with them, we just said we're going to work with what we own, what we know we own. But as far as ownership, like I said, if we're going to base it on the recorded maps, it would be the original lot is Estate 103 and Estate 104. It's probably lot 101, 89, and 90 now. So those would be the landowner of those easements.
All right, is there any government or non-landowner parts there, potentially?
No.
So all private, okay. And my understanding of the public law that we passed, Joey, was that we were very clear that we were not going to affect any potential return submerged lands, only those that were at the time of the law was passed under the jurisdiction of the Chamorro Land Trust.
But the way I read it, though, is the funding would go also, any funding for any submerged lands would go to Chamorro Land Trust.
For those lands under its jurisdiction?
I hope, well, if that's the case, then that would be great.
I see. All right. And we can review that again if you want, but I thought we did hear your testimony, did not try to ignore that and try to really just affect only those for Chamorro Land Trust, and hoping that we're going to come up with a similar for the ancestral lands. Does the ancestral lands own any submerged lands right now?
No, we don't.
All right. Is there any more than this potential submerged lands going to be returned?
As far as we're aware, ma'am, this is the only one for submerged.
Okay. And so according to the lease, again, I'm going back to this environmental or the hazardous materials. There's a large portion here that talks about they shall do all these things in regards to hazardous materials. And I feel like somebody has to make sure that that is being done. And I think it should be the landlord, or the manager, to ensure that they are complying with those portions of the lease regarding hazardous materials. Because quite extensive, and and I guess because of concerns, right, from previous use of this property or current use. Yes, Senator Brown.
On that point that you're referencing, who will be the one to verify that the work has been addressed on any cleanup? Who in ancestral lands? And who's going to be doing the cleanup? Is it the company that's going to be doing it? Because I'm always curious if the federal government has turned over property, that may have contaminants on it. And I don't know if it's related to the previous operation of this facility. Who's the liable party? Do we know? Is it the company? Is it the federal government?
The responsibility to keep the property, environmentally sound is the tenant. Because when the federal government transfers property over, part of the requirements of a transfer by federal law is they had to have performed the environmental baseline. So that is the baseline, and then if the property's condition falls below that baseline, then it is directly assumed that it's the tenant's responsibility because they occupy and use the property.
But do we know who the liable party is? Is it something the military may have done, or is it something that may have occurred as a result of the tenant operating the property? Because I'm also concerned about any federal property we're receiving if the contaminants previously existed and the military is responsible.
Yes.
So you don't want us to be burdened with it.
Yes, ma'am.
Right?
For all the transfer properties, they have to follow their own federal requirement of environmental baseline survey, and if the property is for lack of a better word, dirty, and then it was within the federal government's possession, then it's up to them to mitigate or clean it up to a certain level.
Are there any existing concerns of contaminants on the property now?
There may be some, but it's not. It was, whatever is there was, between the tenant and the military at the time. And so when the military transferred the property, it had to have been cleaned up to a certain point. Otherwise, they wouldn't even be allowed by their own laws and regulations to transfer. So,
okay, so does the Ancestral Lands Commission have any concern about any issues with regards to any previous contaminants?
Well, I'd like to add something
that need to be mitigated, or is that do you have a clean bill of health, so to
Well,
speak?
we had some properties returned, and then later on, there were discovered some contaminants, and it was from the military, so the responsibility fell on them to come, and they ended up cleaning, or they're still continuing some cleanup right now.
How about for this existing property that we're talking about in this lease agreement? Are there any concerns with regards to that, or are you aware it's been mitigated, or?
Well, we're always concerned about the environment there, but what's going on between what happened in the history of the property since they went with since AT&T came in, we have no idea about any contaminants there. But as Gita said, the military, before they return the property, they have a baseline environmental survey and cleanup that should have been done. We don't know to what extent.
Does the government of Guam get a status report on that property? If they did provide the baseline, is that something you have available that that when you're getting it, that
yes,
it has a clean bill of health, so to speak?
Yes, ma'am.
You have those records?
I believe we have a copy of it.
Does the Ancestral Lands have that for their reference?
Yes, they would have it as well, since.
Okay. Is there something you want to add?
So as far as the current condition of the building, we really aren't allowed to inspect the building. It's a restricted area. So as far as the current condition, we can discuss that with the tenant, and we can arrange, if you would like, for us to inspect the area and just to see if there's any existing or if or any previous contaminants. If there's still any there, we can arrange that. But it's just, like I said, the area is restricted, and it takes some time to get clearances for us to even go there. So if you would like for us to do a follow-up, we can do that.
Well, I just want to verify that there's no issue of concern in the transfer of the property to the Ancestral Lands Commission, that you don't have any contaminants or remediation work that has yet to be completed that you need to follow up, or future test, or whatever the case may be. Because again, I don't want that burden to fall on the people of Guam or the Ancestral Lands Commission or Chamorro Land Trust. I sat on the Restoration Advisory Board for Anderson Air Force Base for 14 years, so I'm familiar with their cleanup process and transfers. I just, you know, I don't have direct familiarity. I know where the location of this property is, but I don't have direct familiarity with it. That's why I'm asking. Because if there is any additional issues of cleanup, I just wanted to know who would be on the side of the ancestral lands to verify that, you know, that work is done and that the property is clear of any environmental concerns for the safety of the workers there and anybody else in the future. That's the reason I'm relaying it. But I appreciate, Speaker, thank you for allowing me to ask those questions.
Senator Brown. So the lease does provide that for hazardous materials, they comply with all laws and that and permits that are required, that's up to the tenant, and that they are liable for all of it. Yeah, it doesn't say how often they would be reviewed. So we know now there was a baseline survey done in the beginning of this lease being transferred to ancestral lands, and then there will be one done at the end of the entire term of the lease. I guess you could always check EPA if they are monitoring. Okay, and then can you just again tell me when this lease ends, or the current period ends if this bill does not pass?
This lease will expire at the end of the 5th year anniversary, which will be September 1st, 2024.
2024.
Oh, I'm sorry, September 30th, October 1st, 2024.
Okay.
So we're coming to the end of the 5th year.
All right. September 3rd, 2024. And that was your understanding as well, correct? All right. And all right, is there anything else anyone wants to add before we conclude? Mr. Chair?
Basically, the commission is in support of the legislature approving the bill to renew the lease with AT&T. Extend.
Yeah, so Gita, I know if the property was resolicited, do you believe that there would be interest from other companies?
Maybe, but we can't say either way for sure. It just, depends on if a solicitation is put out, then, what kind of offers come in.
It's tricky because all of the easements leading to the property from the ocean are controlled perhaps by AT&T right now, right?
Yes, it would be.
So they might be, okay. All right. Any other questions from any of my colleagues? Senator Brown.
When does that expire with the military? I mean, they've turned over the land. The easement, though, how long is that in place? The agreement between the federal government and AT&T on the easement?
It looks like these easements are privately owned now, or maybe transferred. Not sure.
The lands are transferred where the easements are. But as far as easement rights, I haven't looked into that because that's not under our jurisdiction. So we only researched the areas that belong to ancestral lands.
I know, but it would be good to know because if these easements are connected to the facility that makes that land of value, it would be good to know. That would be good.
But not to us. It wouldn't be beneficial to us.
Well, but if somebody else were to, if you were to want to lease it out, put it out on the market and another company became interested, the facility is only of value, I'm assuming, because of these cable lines being connected to it. Otherwise, nice view, but right? There's not much value for this particular purpose of telecommunications.
Yeah, that's all we're concerned
about. All of the from the shoreline coming into the facility, is all of that all federal land still, or is it privately owned in between, or a mix, or?
It used to be federal, then it was transferred to Gov Guam, and then it was returned back to the original landowner. Okay,
so there are private property owners that may own the land that these easements.
From the shore to the building, correct.
From the shore to the building, yes.
Okay, and then do you know what's left of that agreement? Is this forever and a day, or is it 10 years, 20 years down the road? I mean, do we know how long that existing requirement of the federal government turning over, saying we're reserving this easement, you can have everything else except this easement, and we're maintaining our relationship with this company for this easement? What is the timeline, if any, on that arrangement? Do you know?
So that's where we have a hard time interpreting that, that reservation. For instance, like the Northern Wastewater Treatment Plant. The federal government said any existing easements, utilities, whatever, are reserved. But now you have the landowner saying, no, that wasn't reserved. And so it's going through court, and hopefully we can get that answer clear. For us, our understanding was if there was any existing infrastructure, the Gov Guam, then Gov Guam instructs ancestral lands to not return that portion. So that was our understanding, simple and clear, but it's not.
Okay, but
But our
can-
understanding is it's supposed to be reserved. Any existing easements, roads, utilities
Okay,
are
but do we
not
have any idea what the timeline is of that reservation of those easements by the federal government?
perpetual. It's a perpetual easement. If it's an easement, then it's perpetual until they say they don't need it anymore. Then they would, what is the term? They would, I'm sorry, but they would let the government know that we don't need this anymore, and then they would, I guess, void, I'm sorry, I can't think of the
No,
word.
I'm just saying, I think it's of value to know, because, I mean, if you have possession of this property now under ancestral lands, and if the future is, who knows, technology can change at some point, maybe they're not going to need these cables. We don't know what's going to happen down the road. But if they still do, it would be a value of the land trust to know with the military, what is the agreement? Because if they were to turn it over down the road, I'm sure you're going to want to get possession of it. So that the value of the terrestrial side of the land is of value to you, but it's only of any real value because of the connection of these cables that access it. So I'm just bringing that up. I think for your information in the future and any future negotiations, it's just something that would be good for all of us to know so that you can continue to benefit. These are the golden gems in your inventory, so I'm sure you're going to want to know that you still have future value use down the road, be it AT&T or whatever other company.
Thank you, Senator Brown.
Thank you, Madam Speaker.
So, Gita, can you confirm, or Ancestral Lands, can you confirm, so that the property was transferred from the federal government to the government of Guam, including, the easements were also transferred? They were not?
No, ma'am,
Okay.
they were not.
All right. All right, then. Okay. If there's no...
Are you
Yes,
saying
Mr.
the
Chair.
properties were transferred?
No, we know that the properties were transferred to the government of Guam, and then the government of Guam took the building to Ancestral Lands, and Ancestral Lands distributed the other properties to the Ancestral Land owners.
Yeah, so the property title, so this is where it gets complicated. Title to the property belongs to that private landowner, but there is an easement that goes through it, and the use of the easement is a different issue.
Yeah, so that was
So-
in the deed from the federal government to the government of Guam. They retained an easement.
They retain, the
Yes.
use of the easement. As far as
Use of
ownership,
easement.
though, it's
Okay.
whoever the current owner is
Okay.
now, so it's a little bit complicated.
All right. And, okay. All right.
And from what I understand, that property was sold
Okay.
by the original landowners, yeah.
All right. So, all right, there being nothing further, we're going to conclude this hearing on Bill 327-37 COR as substituted. Oh, no, sorry, one more question. I substituted because the bill that came from Ancestral Land said 50 years, but I'm calculating it should only be for 45 more years for a total of 50. So we should change all the 50 to 45, is that correct?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes,
All
thank
right,
you.
yes,
I'm
all right,
glad
okay.
you caught that. Thank you so
Okay,
much.
thank you. And so there being no further testimony, we will remain open for submission of additional written testimony for the next 5 working days until August 2nd, 2024. Can send that to Senator Terlaje Guam at gmail.com or hand deliver here to the Guam Congress Building. And we will adjourn this hearing. It's now about 10:58 a.m. Situs Masi.